Imagine waking up tomorrow morning, right? You walk into your kitchen, turn the faucet, and nothing.
Not a single drop.
Exactly. Not a drop. So you think, okay, that's weird. You go to flick the light switch, also nothing.
Total darkness.
Yeah. Of course, you check your phone, but the cell towers are completely dead. Your Wi-Fi is just gone.
Which is terrifying in itself.
It is.
Yeah.
And, at first you probably think it's a severe storm, like a tree fell on a power line or something.
Right, a natural disaster. That's where our brains go.
But then you look outside, and the weather is perfectly clear.
Because it's not a storm.
No, it's not a natural disaster at all. It is a deliberate, mathematically precise act of war.
And that is a really chilling concept to wrap your head around.
It really is. Because the weapon here isn't a nuclear bomb. There's no blinding flash, no mushroom cloud.
Right, no immediate end to civilization in this fiery instant.
Exactly. Instead, the weapon is the sudden, deliberate removal of the invisible life support systems that keep your city breathing.
The water, the power, the communication.
Yeah. You are vaporized in a second. You and millions of other people are just slowly, methodically strangled over a matter of days.
Which is terrifying precisely because it targets the absolute foundation of modern survival. I mean, we walk around completely oblivious to the fact that the water flowing from our taps or the electricity cooling our refrigerators, those aren't natural phenomena.
Right, it's not magic.
No, they're incredibly fragile, highly intricate industrial processes. And when those processes stop, the modern city doesn't just become, inconvenient.
It becomes an unlivable concrete trap.
Exactly.
And that profound fragility is exactly what we are unpacking today. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone.
We have a really heavy one today.
We do. We are stepping into a highly detailed hypothetical scenario. It's a strategic analysis exploring what happens when the world's most advanced militaries stop aiming at each other's tanks and start aiming at each other's circulatory systems.
The infrastructure.
Right. Specifically, we're examining a speculative scenario based on a text by Paramendra Kumar Bhagat dated April 7, 2026.
So near future.
Very near future. And it visualizes this grinding 6-week-old war involving the United States, Israel, and Iran.
And it's a scenario that completely upends how we usually think about global conflict. I mean, we are moving away from the old Cold War nightmare of mutually assured destruction.
The whole MAD doctrine, everyone dies in a nuclear holocaust.
Exactly. We're moving from that to exploring a new doctrine, which is Mutual Assured Catastrophe, or MAC.
MA. Wow. Okay, so our mission today is to completely deconstruct this idea of mutual assured catastrophe. We want to understand the actual physics and the logistics of why targeting these systems is so devastating.
How a war over power lines and water pipes actually works in practice.
Yeah, and why it has the power to essentially take the entire planet hostage.
But before we get into the mechanics of power grids and all that, we really need to take a deliberate pause here.
Yes, we do. We need to address you, the listener, directly for a moment.
Because the scenario we are exploring today involves some highly politically charged, very sensitive content.
Extremely sensitive. We're talking about the United States, Israel, Iran, global powers, regime actions, stuff that evokes fierce debates globally.
So we want to state this as clearly as humanly possible. We are absolutely not taking any sides here.
Zero. Not left-wing, not right-wing, or any other political stance whatsoever.
We are impartially reporting the content provided in this strategic analysis.
Right. We are not endorsing the viewpoints, the military actions, or the policies of any nation, group, or individual mentioned in the source. We are simply conveying the ideas and the strategic possibilities explored in this specific speculative text.
Our only goal is to help you understand the systemic realities of this scenario.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start right at the foundation. So, for decades, the ultimate deterrent in global politics was mutually assured destruction, MAD.
The binary switch.
Yeah. If you launch your nukes at us, we launch ours at you, the world burns. But this scenario introduces MS, Mutual Assured Catastrophe. I'm trying to wrap my head around this. If there are no nukes involved, how does a conventional war achieve that same level of civilizational collapse?
Well, because it targets the exact same vulnerabilities, just with scalpels instead of sledgehammers.
Scalpels,
Right? Think about how a modern country operates. MAD relied on the threat of instant physical vaporization. MAC, or, mad without mushrooms, as some call it, relies on the fact that you don't need a nuke to end a society.
You just turn off the electricity.
Permanently. In this 2026 scenario, the United States employs a strategy based on explicit threats. Specifically, the text notes former President Trump's explicit threat to systematically decimate every major bridge and disable every power plant in Iran if they attempt to close the Strait of Hormuz.
Wait, okay, I need to understand the mechanics of that.
Yeah.
When we talk about disabling a power plant, what does that actually mean? Are they just dropping bombs and blowing up concrete buildings?
No, and that's the really insidious part of this whole strategy. You don't need to level a massive facility. The U.S. possesses absolute intelligence dominance.
Like satellites mapping the grid.
Satellites mapping every inch of it. Combined with long-range stealth bombers and precision-guided cruise missiles, they know exactly where the critical nodes are. See, a power grid is essentially this incredibly delicate balancing act.
How so?
Well, the electricity being generated at a massive plant, let's say the Damafan power plant near Tehran, which produces like 2,900 megawatts, that electricity has to perfectly match the electricity being consumed across the country, down to the exact frequency.
Wait, really? So it's not like a battery where you just store it up and draw from it when you need it?
Not at all. AC power is generated and consumed almost simultaneously. It travels through specialized transformer hubs and these massive high-voltage transmission corridors.
Yay.
So if a stealth bomber drops a precision munition on just a few of those critical switching stations...
The electricity suddenly has nowhere to go.
Exactly. It has nowhere to go. So the generators overheat. Safety systems automatically trip to prevent the massive turbines from literally ripping themselves apart.
Wow.
This causes a massive instantaneous drop in power across the entire grid. So the remaining plants try to overcompensate to pick up the slack.
Which causes them to overheat.
And they trip offline.
Ah, so it's a cascading failure, like falling dominoes. You don't have to bomb 50 power plants. It sounds like you don't need to destroy every blood vessel to kill a body. You just need to pinch the main arteries.
To transformer hubs.
Yeah, to cause the whole system to panic and shut itself down.
That's a perfect analogy, and it brings up this deeply controversial element of modern warfare. Power grids are what military strategists call dual-use infrastructure.
Meaning they serve both civilians and the military.
Right. The exact same electron that powers a civilian hospital ventilator is also powering the military radar system that's looking for incoming bombers.
Man, that feels like a massive ethical and legal minefield. Because if you destroy the grid to blind the military radars, you are knowingly turning off the incubators in the neonatal wards. Doesn't that risk violating the Geneva Conventions?
It dances right on the razor's edge of the principles of proportionality and distinction. Militaries will argue that disabling the grid is absolutely necessary to defeat the enemy's command and control.
But the reality is you're starving the civilian population.
Inherently, yes. You're creating rolling blackouts, freezing fuel distribution, and causing the economy to just immediately flatline. But the temptation for a military planner is obvious. You can paralyze a nation of 92 million people without ever putting a single soldier on the ground.
Right. But the mutual part of Mutual Assured Catastrophe implies Iran isn't just sitting there absorbing these strikes. How do they retaliate if they don't have fleets of stealth bombers?
They retaliate through stark geographic asymmetry.
Okay, break that down for me.
Well, Iran is huge. It's mountainous, and its population is widely dispersed. They can absorb a lot of punishment. But look directly across the Persian Gulf at the Gulf Cooperation Council, states the GCC.
So Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain.
Exactly. Their geography is the complete opposite of Iran's.
Right. They are mostly coastal, heavily urbanized, and their populations and infrastructure are incredibly concentrated.
Highly concentrated. And Iran happens to possess the largest, most diverse ballistic missile arsenal in the Middle East. We're talking missiles capable of reaching up to 2,000 kilometers.
So every single critical piece of infrastructure in the Gulf is within striking distance.
Every single one. So Iran's doctrine is asymmetric punishment. They don't try to shoot down every American stealth bomber. That's a losing game. Instead, they say, if you turn off our lights, we will completely obliterate the economic engines of your closest regional allies.
They target the oil.
They target the entire energy ecosystem. And to really understand the scale of this vulnerability, the text points back to a real-world event. The 2019 attack on the Abqaiq and Kurais oil facilities in Saudi Arabia.
Oh, I remember that making massive headlines. But what actually happened there on a mechanical level?
So in 2019, a swarm of relatively cheap drones and cruise missiles struck the Abqaiq facility. Now, Abqaiq is the largest crude oil stabilization plant in the world.
Stabilization plant, what does that do?
Well, when oil comes out of the ground, it's not ready to just go onto a ship. It's full of highly toxic hydrogen sulfide gas and water. It's raw. A stabilization plant essentially cooks and purifies that crude in these massive, custom fabricated metal towers. They're called stabilization columns.
Okay, so the 2019 strike targeted those columns.
Exactly. It specifically punched precision holes in those highly pressurized columns.
Wow. So it wasn't just like setting a puddle of oil on fire. It was precision engineering destruction.
Very precise. And that single limited attack temporarily knocked out 5.7 million barrels of daily oil production.
Just a massive shock to the system.
Huge. Now imagine that kind of precision attack happening every single night for 6 weeks. Not just on one plant, but on export terminals, offshore platforms, and the massive pipeline networks that cross the desert.
And I imagine repairing a custom-built stabilization column isn't like running to the hardware store for a new pipe.
Oh, not at all. It requires highly specialized metallurgy. You need massive foreign engineering conglomerates to come in, assess the damage, fabricate new parts halfway across the world, and then install them.
And here is the kicker. I bet no foreign contractor is going to send a team of specialized engineers into an active war zone where ballistic missiles are falling daily.
Bingo, they won't do it. So the damage just accumulates. The circulatory system of the global energy market just shatters.
That is horrifying from an economic standpoint. But as bad as the oil disruption is, there's another vulnerability in the Gulf that is vastly more terrifying. I mean, you can live without oil for a while. You cannot live without water.
Yes, this is the true civilizational nightmare of this scenario. The Gulf states do not have rivers. They don't get regular rainfall. They do not have massive, self-replenishing underground aquifers.
Right.
Their entire existence in these hyper-modern glass skyscraper cities is entirely dependent on machines.
Desalination. I was looking at the numbers in the scenario, and the level of dependence is difficult to even process. Qatar relies on desalinated water for nearly 100% of its municipal needs. Kuwait is around 90%.
Bahrain is extremely high, too.
Yeah, and the UAE is over 50%. Saudi Arabia and Oman, their coastal population centers are entirely tethered to these massive industrial plants.
If oil is the blood of the Gulf economy, desalination is the oxygen. And oxygen systems do not tolerate partial disruption. You really have to understand how these plants work to see how fragile they are. They primarily use a process called reverse osmosis.
I've heard that term, but how does it actually turn seawater into drinking water on a massive municipal scale?
So imagine taking millions of gallons of ocean water, which is incredibly salty, full of microscopic life, algae, sand, and forcing it at immense, crushing pressure through a series of ultrafine synthetic membranes.
Okay.
These membranes are so microscopic that they let water molecules pass through, but they block the salt and the impurities.
That sounds like it requires a massive amount of energy just to create that kind of pressure.
It does. Desalination plants are absolute energy hogs. They require a constant, uninterrupted feed of high-voltage electricity. Furthermore, these plants are massive, sprawling facilities located right on the coastline. They are incredibly exposed.
Right on the beach, essentially.
Yeah. And they have giant intake pipes extending out into the ocean, continuously sucking in millions of gallons of seawater.
So, going back to Iran's missile strategy, they don't even need to completely flatten the desalination plant to stop the water, do they?
No. The system has zero tolerance for disruption. If the Iranian missiles hit the power plant that's feeding the desalination facility, the pumps stop. The pressure drops. The water stops. Or, let's say the missiles miss the plant entirely, but they strike a nearby oil export terminal.
Oh, wow. If an oil terminal is hit, millions of gallons of crude oil spill directly into the Persian Gulf.
Exactly. And those desalination intake pipes, they are blindly sucking in whatever is in the water.
Oh, no.
If thick crude oil enters the intake system, it will completely coat and ruin those delicate reverse osmosis membranes instantly. The entire plant has to shut down immediately to avoid destroying its own internal architecture. So even collateral damage is fatal to the water supply.
That is deeply unsettling. But, I mean, couldn't these wealthy nations just buy their way out of this? Like, activate emergency reserves or just pay a fleet of trucks to haul water in from outside the conflict zone?
It's a logistical impossibility. Money cannot purchase rain. Let's do the math here.
Right.
A modern city of several million people consumes hundreds of millions of gallons of water every single day.
Okay.
A standard large tanker truck holds maybe 5,000 to 8,000 gallons.
So you would need
tens of thousands of trucks arriving every single hour, continuously, to even make a dent in the municipal demand.
Which is impossible. The roads would be instantly gridlocked.
Exactly. And remember, the fuel distribution systems are already compromised because of the war. Money simply cannot buy enough trucks or bend the laws of physics to replace a centralized municipal water system overnight.
So what is the actual timeline of a collapse like that?
It is stunningly fast. A modern city can survive without oil revenues for weeks, maybe months. It can survive without electricity for a few days. Generators keep the hospitals on life support. People eat the food in their freezers before it spoils.
Sure.
But without water, a city becomes ungovernable in hours.
Hours. Just hours.
Think about the cascading effects. Within hours of the taps running dry, the hospitals collapse. You cannot sterilize surgical equipment. You cannot run dialysis machines.
Right.
Then the sanitation system fails. Toilets stop flushing. Sewage begins backing up into high-rise apartment buildings. Almost immediately, you face the outbreak of waterborne diseases like cholera.
Oh my.
The fire departments become useless. If a building catches fire, there is no water pressure in the hydrants to put it out.
So the social contract just dissolves.
Instantly. When people realize there is no water coming, panic sets in. It triggers a mass exodus. Millions of people trying to flee the cities into a harsh desert environment, creating an unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe. A city without water doesn't just regress to the 19th century, it essentially ceases to be a human habitat.
And while the Gulf states are dealing with this existential threat to their very survival, the conflict is simultaneously choking the rest of the planet through the Strait of Hormuz.
Yes, the Strait of Hormuz is the great geographical choke point of the global economy. It's this narrow waterway between Oman and Iran. Roughly 20 to 25% of the world's total seaborne oil trade passes right through it.
Along with massive shipments of liquefied natural gas, or LNG, primarily from Qatar.
Right.
So how does Iran close it? Are they engaging in massive naval battles with American aircraft carriers?
They don't need to. That's another asymmetric advantage.
Yeah.
To close a waterway to commercial shipping, you don't need to sink an aircraft carrier. You just need to create an unacceptable level of risk for a commercial enterprise.
Make it too dangerous for business.
Exactly. Iran utilizes naval mines, swarms of fast attack boats, anti-ship cruise missiles hidden in the mountains overlooking the strait, and suicide drones.
So it's about the threat, not necessarily the actual sinking of a ship.
It's all about maritime insurance. The moment a conflict ticks off and Iran drops even a handful of naval mines into the water, the insurance conglomerates like Lloyd's of London will instantly declare the entire Persian Gulf a high-risk war zone.
Meaning they pull their coverage.
They will either cancel insurance policies for commercial tankers entirely or raise the premiums so astronomically high that it becomes economically unviable to sail a ship into the Gulf.
Yeah, a tanker captain isn't going to drive a floating bomb into a minefield without insurance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this leads to a really brilliant point in the scenario about the illusion of military solutions to economic problems.
Tell me about that.
Let's imagine the U.S. Navy deploys minesweepers and successfully clears a safe corridor through the Strait of Hormuz. A military planner might look at that and say, great, the strait is reopened, trade can resume.
But it doesn't.
No, because clearing the water of mines doesn't magically fix the shattered infrastructure on the shores. If Iran has spent the last month hammering the loading docks, the pumping stations, and the stabilization plants we talked about earlier, it doesn't matter if the water is clear.
The tanker sails through the strait, pulls up to the port, and finds out there's no oil to load.
Right. The pumps are destroyed, the maritime artery is surgically reopened, but the heart pumping the oil is still bleeding out.
Wow. So the global ramifications are immediate. If 20% of the world's oil is suddenly removed from the market, what happens to the global economy?
Total contagion. The scenario projects oil prices spiking to $150, maybe even $200 a barrel almost overnight.
Which isn't just pain at the gas pump in the U.S.
No, it's an existential threat to the manufacturing economies of Asia. China and India import massive amounts of their energy from the Gulf. If those shipments stop, factories in Shenzhen and Mumbai literally power down. Europe, which is heavily reliant on Qatari LNG to replace lost Russian gas, faces crippling energy shortages. It triggers global hyperinflation, supply chain collapse, and massive economic contractions. The entire globe essentially becomes a hostage to this localized infrastructure war.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. We've established how utterly devastating this MDE scenario is for the Gulf states and the global economy. But I want to pivot back to the United States and Iran for a moment. The U.S. initiated this massive global crisis by bombing Iranian bridges and power plants to force the regime to comply.
Right.
But if we look closely at the military realities inside Iran, Is that even a sound strategy? Does bombing a country's infrastructure actually force its military to surrender?
The analysis argues very forcefully that it does not. In fact, it argues that systematically destroying civilian infrastructure offers almost zero tactical utility if the ultimate goal is regime collapse or a ground invasion.
Wait, why not? If you turn off the lights, shouldn't the military crumble?
Because of the geography and the way the Iranian military is structured, first, consider the terrain. Iran is roughly 4 times the size of Iraq. And it's not a flat, open desert where American tanks can just roll at top speed.
It's mountainous.
Extremely. It is a massive geographical fortress defined by the Zagros Mountains in the west and the Alborz Mountains in the north. It is a labyrinth of deep valleys, high peaks, and narrow passes.
Right, so moving an army through that is a nightmare to begin with.
And the military structure inside that fortress is perfectly adapted to survive an infrastructure war. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, has spent decades watching the U.S. military operate in the Middle East. They know the U.S. relies on precise air power.
So they adapted.
Exactly. So the IRGC doesn't rely on the civilian electrical grid. They have spent years building a completely parallel, deeply hardened infrastructure.
How hardened are we talking? Like a few backup generators?
No, we are talking about critical command centers, missile production facilities, and communications hubs buried deep inside mountains under hundreds of feet of solid rock.
Wow.
We're talking about massive, localized microgrids powered by heavy diesel generators with fuel caches designed to last for months, completely disconnected from the vulnerable civilian transformers on the surface.
Oh, I see. So wait, the doctrine of maximum pressure, which the text compares to the violent twin of the tariff wars, actually backfires. You're basically dropping multi-million-dollar bombs to plunge civilian neighborhoods into darkness, but the guys with the ballistic missiles are sitting inside a mountain with the lights still on. You're just turning the lights off, which gives the bees a better place to hide and sting you in the dark.
That is exactly the strategic illusion the scenario warns about. Planners often mistakenly look back at the 1991 Gulf War as the model. In 1991, the coalition bombed the Iraqi civilian and military infrastructure, and the conventional Iraqi army in the open desert quickly became paralyzed.
But Iran in 2026 is totally different.
Completely. They are deeply dug in, heavily dispersed, and fundamentally built for asymmetric warfare. Bombing the civilian infrastructure targets the soft tissue of the nation, but it leaves the hardened military skeleton entirely intact.
And worse than that, doesn't destroying the infrastructure actually make it infinitely harder if the U.S. does decide to invade?
It creates a massive logistical trap. Think about what a modern mechanized army requires to advance. An M1 Abrams tank gets of fuel trucks, ammunition carriers, and supply convoys following right behind it. To move those convoys, you need intact, heavy-duty highways and structurally sound bridges.
Wait, so if the U.S. Air Force executes the plan to decimate every bridge,
they are actively destroying the very roads their own army needs to invade.
that's crazy.
If you blow up the bridges spanning the deep gorges of the Zagros Mountains, your tank columns can't cross. They get bottlenecked. You funnel your own armor into narrow, highly predictable routes.
Which creates perfect, ready-made ambush corridors for the IRGC.
Exactly. You are handing the tactical advantage to a defender who thrives in chaotic, ruined landscapes. A cratered, blacked-out country is not a pacified country. It is the perfect ecosystem for a grinding insurgency. The analysis includes a fantastic observation on this point. Ownership in war is often the most expensive form of defeat.
Ownership is the most expensive form of defeat. That's a powerful phrase. What does that mean in this context?
It means that if you invade and conquer a country where you have systematically destroyed the water plants, the power grids, and the hospitals, you suddenly own the humanitarian disaster you just created.
You become responsible for it.
Right. You are now the occupying force responsible for millions of starving, thirsty, desperate civilians. The logistical burden of just trying to keep the population alive drains your military resources instantly.
But what about the psychological element? I've often heard the theory that if you make the living conditions miserable enough for the civilian population, they will eventually turn on their own government and overthrow the dictator to make the bombing stop. Does that work?
Historically, and in this scenario, it usually achieves the exact opposite. It triggers what political scientists call the rally around the flag effect.
Even if they hate the government.
Even then, when a foreign power is actively dropping bombs on your city and turning off your children's access to clean water, your immediate anger is directed at the bombers, not the government hiding in a bunker.
Because survival takes precedence over political reform.
Precisely. And authoritarian regimes are incredibly skilled at weaponizing civilian suffering. The IRGC can point to the blackout and the starvation and say, "Look at what the foreign invaders are doing to you. We are your only defense." It hands the regime a massive propaganda victory and provides a steady pipeline of angry, desperate young men willing to join insurgent militias to fight the occupying force. The suffering becomes the engine of mobilization.
So Iran survives the bombing through geographic fortresses and hardened systems, while the Gulf faces rapid systemic ruin. But there is a third major player in this scenario that is enduring a completely different type of warfare: Israel.
Yes. The scenario gives us a very clear snapshot of Israel's situation around day 38 to 40 of this hypothetical conflict. It's a fascinating contrast. Israel is not facing the catastrophic systemic collapse of its grid like the Gulf, nor is it a massive geographic fortress like Iran.
Instead, it is facing a war of sustained, grinding attrition.
Exactly.
The numbers in the analysis are staggering. By early April 2026, Iran has launched over 400 identified attack waves against Israel. They're using a mix of long-range ballistic missiles, cruise variants, and drone swarms with cluster munitions.
And these aren't just hitting military bases.
No. The strikes are impacting population centers. Haifa gets hit a 7-story residential building and nearby oil refineries. Tel Aviv is targeted, even desert towns like Dimona. The deadliest single strike mentioned is in Beit Shemesh, resulting in 9 civilian casualties.
And the reason that casualty number is relatively low, despite 400 waves of incoming fire, is due to Israel's phenomenal multi-layered air defense architecture.
It's basically a shield.
A highly integrated one. You have the Iron Dome handling short-range rockets and drones. You have David's Sling intercepting medium-range cruise missiles and heavy rockets. And you have the Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 systems, which are designed to leave the Earth's atmosphere and intercept long-range ballistic missiles in space before they re-enter.
I understand the Iron Dome is famous, but how does it actually work during a massive barrage? It's not just randomly shooting rockets into the sky, right?
Not at all. It is a masterpiece of real-time computing and radar tracking. When an enemy rocket is launched, the Iron Dome's radar array instantly detects it. Within milliseconds, the system's battle management computer calculates the precise trajectory of that rocket.
Got it.
It determines exactly where it is going to land. If the computer calculates the rocket is going to fall harmlessly in an empty desert or the ocean, it ignores it. It doesn't waste an interceptor.
It only fires if the rocket is heading for a city or a critical facility.
Exactly. And when it does fire the Tamir interceptor missile, it doesn't try to hit the incoming rocket bullet on bullet. The interceptor uses a proximity fuse. It gets incredibly close to the incoming threat and detonates itself, creating a cloud of shrapnel that shreds the incoming rocket midair.
That is incredible technology. And the scenario notes that Iron Dome alone has 10,000 career intercepts. Combined, these layers are achieving an 85 to 90% interception rate, which sounds like a massive victory.
It is a technological marvel that keeps the state functioning, but there is a brutal underlying math to this kind of defense. It's a game of asymmetric economics.
What do you mean by that?
Consider the cost. Iran or its proxies can manufacture a basic suicide drone or an unguided rocket for maybe $20,000 or $30,000, sometimes much less.
Right.
A single Iron Dome interceptor costs roughly $50,000, but a David Sling interceptor costs around $1 million. An Arrow 3 interceptor can cost several $1,000,000.
Wow. So Iran is firing $30,000 drones, and Israel is forced to fire $1 million missiles to stop them.
Exactly. And Iran knows this perfectly well, so their strategy is saturation. They fire dozens of cheap decoy drones simultaneously with a handful of highly advanced ballistic missiles.
To overwhelm the system.
The goal is to simply overwhelm the processing power of the radar and force Israel to exhaust its interceptor stockpiles. The interceptors have to be aggressively rationed because they take months to manufacture.
And even with a 90% success rate, the math eventually catches up to you.
Yeah.
If you are successfully stopping 9 out of 10 missiles, but the one that gets through carries cluster munitions.
Which completely changes the equation.
Right. Explain cluster munitions.
A traditional missile has a single large explosive warhead. If it hits a building, it destroys that building. But a cluster munition opens up in midair and violently scatters hundreds of smaller submunitions essentially hundreds of grenades, over an area the size of several football fields.
So even if the Iron Dome intercepts the main missile, if it intercepts it too late, the cluster payload might still scatter deadly shrapnel all over a neighborhood.
Yes. And that constant statistical reality creates a profound psychological toll. How long can a society function when the sirens wail 3 times a day, every day, for 6 weeks?
Yeah, how long can a society function before the psychological dread completely freezes the economy?
It freezes fast. Every time the siren goes off, you have 90 seconds or less to drop whatever you are doing, grab your children, and run to a reinforced concrete shelter.
You can't run a modern tech economy from a bomb shelter.
You can't. Schools are closed. Foreign investment freezes. International airlines cancel all flights, which instantly kills the tourism sector. Supply chains are disrupted because truck drivers have to constantly pull over and take cover.
So the infrastructure isn't physically destroyed like it is in the Gulf, but the society is suffocating under the chronic, relentless psychological dread of living under fire.
The analysis calls it strategic attrition. Israel isn't defeated militarily, but it is slowly bleeding out economically and psychologically. It's the exhaustion of enduring a siege.
Now, Israel's dealing with the immense trauma of missiles raining down from above. But it's fascinating to look back at the timeline, because just months prior to this war breaking out, the Iranian regime was dealing with a massive existential threat coming from below from its own citizens.
Yes, the strategic analysis dedicates a significant section to an internal uprising in Iran that occurred just before the regional war ignited. It refers to this period as the lost winter of December 2025 to January 2026.
The details of this uprising are incredible. It describes a massive cross-class revolt that swept through all 31 provinces and over 200 cities. And it started on December 28, 2025, in a very specific, historically crucial location, the Tehran Grand Bazaar.
To understand Iranian politics, you really have to understand the bazaar. It is not just a marketplace. It is the traditional economic heart of the country and a massive political bellwether.
How so?
Throughout Iranian history, going back over a century, when the bazaar merchants go on strike, governments fall. They represent the conservative religious middle class that traditionally supported the regime.
So if the bazaar turns on the government, the foundation is cracking. And what drove them to the streets wasn't just abstract political theory, it was pure economic desperation. The analysis states that inflation reached a point where the rial hit 1.4 million to a single US dollar.
We throw the word hyperinflation around, but let's break down what 1.4 million reals to the dollar actually means for a normal person.
Yeah, put that in perspective.
It means the money in your bank account evaporates overnight. It means a pensioner's entire life savings can suddenly barely buy a week's worth of groceries. It means a baker can't afford to import the wheat to make bread, and even if they could, no one could afford to buy it. Wages become mathematically meaningless.
It's economic suffocation. And the analysis notes how quickly the nature of the protests evolved. It started with people furious about the price of eggs and bread, but within days, the slogans morphed into outright revolutionary demands. People were openly shouting, "Death to the dictator," and demanding the complete dismantling of the regime.
What made this uprising so terrifying for the regime was its demographics. This wasn't just university students in Tehran demanding social freedoms. It was the bazaar merchants, the retired pensioners, the blue-collar laborers, and marginalized ethnic groups in the provinces.
So it was everybody.
It was the sound of the entire social contract breaking under the weight of sheer poverty.
But despite the sheer size of the movement, it had a fatal vulnerability. The analysis points out that it was a completely leaderless, decentralized movement.
That is the tragic paradox of modern social media-driven protests. Being leaderless makes a movement incredibly fast and hard to predict because it erupts organically everywhere at once. There is no central committee for the secret police to arrest.
Right.
But without central leadership, there is no unified strategy. There is no one to organize supply lines, no one to formulate coherent demands, and most importantly, no one to negotiate a transition of power.
So they hit a wall.
A spontaneous crowd, no matter how large or angry, simply cannot withstand the highly organized, heavily armed, and brutally systematic machinery of a state security apparatus designed specifically to crush domestic dissent.
And the crackdown was unimaginably severe. The analysis highlights January 8th and 9th as the deadliest phase of the lost winter. The regime didn't hold back. They severed all telecommunications and internet access to plunge the country into an information blackout. They instituted martial law curfews. And they deploy the IRGC and the Basij forces.
The Basij are a crucial element to understand here. They are a paramilitary volunteer militia, deeply loyal to the supreme leader. They operate in plainclothes or informal uniforms, riding motorcycles into crowds with batons, and eventually live ammunition. They are the blunt instrument of domestic terror.
The reports estimate thousands, potentially tens of thousands dead in the streets, and over 50,000 arrested.
And the arrests are just the beginning of the nightmare. The state utilizes notorious facilities like Evin Prison, which is infamous for systematic torture and forced confessions. The judicial system becomes a weapon.
How do they use the courts?
The revolutionary courts bypass standard legal procedures and charge protesters with crimes like moharebe.
I saw that term in the text. It translates to waging war against God.
Exactly. It's a deeply weaponized theological charge. It elevates a political protest against inflation into a capital offense against the divine order. It is designed to justify mass executions and terrorize the remaining population into absolute paralyzing submission.
The movement is ultimately completely suffocated by two massive sequential shocks. The sudden death of Supreme Leader Khamenei on February 28, which creates a massive internal power consolidation, and then the immediate outbreak of the regional MAC war we've been discussing.
The war essentially freezes the domestic politics in place.
It makes me think of an analogy. It's like a fire broke out in a house, and to stop it, the owners just vacuumed all the oxygen out of the rooms, suffocating everyone inside. But my question is, where are these people now? Did the war make them forget their anger? Did the millions of people who wanted a revolution just forget they were angry because the U.S. started bombing?
They absolutely did not forget. The protesters are dead, imprisoned in places like Evin, or forced underground. The underlying rot is still there. But the war forced a radical shift in priorities.
Right.
When you are waking up every morning wondering if the power grid will function, if the water will flow, and if the economy will completely collapse under American airstrikes, your entire cognitive bandwidth shifts to bare survival. Mass political mobilization is a luxury of a functioning society.
Wow, yeah.
When the society breaks down, you focus on feeding your family. The war didn't erase their anger, it just forced them into a daily struggle for survival.
So what does this all mean? It's a terrifying paradox. The protests proved the state is deeply unpopular and economically fragile, but the crackdown proved the IRGC is cohesive and willing to massacre its own to survive. So if the regime survived the protests through brutality and is surviving the U.S. bombs through geography, what is the ultimate endpoint of this war for Iran?
The strategic analysis lays out two potential nightmare endpoints. Two drastically different but equally catastrophic branches for what the Iranian state looks like at the conclusion of this infrastructure war.
Let's start with branch one. The analysis calls this the ruined state scenario.
In the ruined state scenario, the regime technically survives, but the nation itself is effectively destroyed. The national power grid is permanently 70 to 80% offline. The water infrastructure is shattered.
So they can't govern.
The state looks at the map and realizes it simply does not have the resources, the power, or the logistics to govern the vast periphery of the country.
So what do? Do they just give up?
No, they constrict. The IRGC and the surviving government abandon the outer provinces entirely. They pull all their remaining resources, their loyalist forces, and their diesel fuel inward, bunkering down around Tehran, the major military nodes, and the surviving missile silos.
They become an armed, ideological elite squatting on a fortress of ruins.
While the rest of the country, the provinces, the rural areas, just falls into darkness and famine.
That's grim.
And the terrifying part is that even as a ruined state, they remain a massive regional threat. They still control their proxy militias in Lebanon and Yemen. They still control whatever ballistic missiles survived the bombing. They are a wounded animal that can still project asymmetric pain outward, but they offer zero governance inward.
But branch two sounds arguably worse. It describes a Libya-style collapse on a massive scale.
Branch two is the civilizational nightmare. In this scenario, the pressure of the infrastructure bombing, combined with the underlying fury of the crushed protests, finally shatters the IRGC's cohesion. The regime totally implodes. The government falls.
But there's no democratic opposition waiting in the wings to take over.
Because the regime spent 40 years executing, jailing, or exiling anyone with leadership potential. So when the center collapses, it creates a massive, violent vacuum.
And who fills it?
Whoever has guns. Remnants of the IRGC turn into private warlord armies. Ethnic militias, the Kurds in the west, the Balak in the southeast, the Azeris in the north seize territory. The country fragments into brutal, warring fiefdoms.
I'm trying to process the scale of that. The analysis contrasts this with the collapse of Libya in 2011. Libya had roughly 7.5 million people, and its collapse destabilized North Africa for a decade. Iran has nearly 93 million people.
The math of the collapse is apocalyptic. Iran shares borders with incredibly fragile, volatile regions: Iraq, Turkey, the Caucasus, Pakistan, Afghanistan. If a state of 93 million people fractures into warlord violence and famine, the resulting human exodus would be unprecedented.
How many refugees are we talking?
The analysis projects it could generate up to 10 million refugees pouring across the borders in every direction.
10 million people. The logistics of that are impossible. Where do they get water on the road? How do neighboring countries, like an already struggling Iraq or Pakistan, absorb millions of desperate, starving people without collapsing themselves?
They can't. The wave of human suffering would overwhelm the entire region, dwarfing the Syrian refugee crisis of the 2010s. It would destabilize governments from the Mediterranean to South Asia. But as horrifying as the refugee crisis is, there is an even more terrifying variable in a total Iranian state collapse.
The nuclear variable. The analysis refers to it as the nuclear bazaar.
Yes. Iran possesses deeply advanced nuclear enrichment capabilities. They have cavernous underground facilities filled with sophisticated centrifuges. They have massive stockpiles of enriched uranium. And they have thousands of scientists with the technical knowledge to build a bomb.
If the state fractures into warlord fiefdoms, who is guarding the uranium?
That is the ultimate question. If the centralized command structure evaporates, those underground enrichment sites become the most valuable loot on the planet. Suddenly, you have heavily armed regional warlords, radical insurgent groups, or terrorist networks taking control of centrifuges and fissile material.
They wouldn't even necessarily build a bomb themselves. They would just sell the material to the highest bidder on the black market.
Exactly. Warlords become nuclear negotiators.
Yeah.
It guarantees that nuclear material proliferates to non-state actors, which is the absolute worst-case scenario for global security.
It's an impossible dilemma. This sounds like you're cornering a villain, and your options are to let him lock himself in a burning bunker where he still has a gun and continues to shoot at people outside. That's the ruined state.
Right.
Or you blow up the bunker, killing him, but scattering his radioactive weapons into the neighborhood for gangs to pick up. That's the Libya-style collapse. Which is worse. Neither option resembles a victory.
They are both catastrophic failures of international order.
Which brings up a glaring question. With a crisis this massive, spilling over borders and choking global trade, why hasn't the rest of the world stepped in to stop it? Where are the adults in the room?
You would expect an international body to step in, act as a referee, and impose a ceasefire. But this scenario exposes the deep structural paralysis of our modern global institutions. The traditional mechanisms of peace are entirely broken.
The United Nations Security Council, for instance.
The UN Security Council is fundamentally gridlocked by vetoes. The U.S. will veto any resolution condemning Israel or its own actions, and Russia and China will veto any resolution empowering the U.S. or sanctioning Iran further. It is a diplomatic stalemate.
What about the G7?
The G7 has lost its credibility in this scenario. Because the U.S. is the primary driver of the infrastructure bombing in Iran, the Global South views the G7 not as a neutral arbiter of peace, but as the architect of the escalation.
Now, a lot of recent geopolitical discourse focuses on BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, as the emerging multipolar alternative. Do they step in and enforce peace?
This is one of the most insightful parts of the analysis. It reveals that BRICS is deeply, inherently fractured by this specific war. Multipolarity sounds great in theory, but in practice, it just means you have multiple competing self-interests. BRICS is not a unified alliance.
How does the war fracture them?
Look at the individual incentives. Russia, initially, actually benefits from the chaos. High oil prices due to the Strait of Hormuz closure massively boost Moscow's energy revenues. Plus, the U.S. being bogged down in the Middle East distracts Western attention away from Eastern Europe.
So Russia is fine watching it burn for a while. What about China?
China is the opposite. China needs stability for its massive export machine. The inflation and energy shock of this war threatens to stall the Chinese economy.
And India.
India is caught in the middle, trying to hedge its bets. They need the Gulf oil, but they also rely heavily on Western strategic partnerships. And then look at the new BRICS members. The UAE and Saudi Arabia are being directly bombarded by Iran, while Iran is also a BRICS member.
So BRICS members are literally shooting missiles at each other.
Exactly. Multipolarity does not produce impartial referees. It produces rival gangs. BRICS can't act as the Supreme Court of the world, so instead of justice, the world gets what the analysis calls a negotiation bazaar.
What does a negotiation bazaar look like?
Peace isn't achieved through treaties. It's purchased through infrastructure contracts. Whoever can provide emergency mobile desalination units, extend massive reconstruction loans, and offer sanctions-busting oil purchases will become the default crisis manager.
And who has the capital to do that?
Primarily China and to a lesser extent Russia. They step into the vacuum and say, "We didn't drop the bombs. We are here to rebuild the pipes."
So the gavel of international law has been replaced by the checkbook. You're saying the countries that didn't start the war are going to be the ones who own the peace simply because they have the cash to rebuild the pipes.
Yes, and this normalizes infrastructure warfare globally. The message sent to the world is that Western military invention creates monsters, which accelerates de-dollarization and regional arms races.
But rebuilding those pipes, regardless of who writes the check, is a monumental task. I want to shift our focus to the brutal timeline of what happens after the bombs finally stop falling, because you can't just flip a switch and undo a mutual assured catastrophe.
The analysis refers to the post-war reality as the impossible equation. And to understand why it's impossible, we have to look at what both sides actually want and why neither side can compromise.
Right. Let's look at the U.S. and Israeli objectives. The analysis outlines 4 pillars that they are trying to achieve: stopping the Iranian nuclear program, capping their long-range ballistic missile production, dismantling their network of proxy militias, and ending the regime's brutal internal repression.
From a Western and Israeli perspective, those 4 goals are seen as absolutely justified.
But how does Tehran view those same 4 pillars?
Tehran treats them as existential. The nuclear program is their leverage. The ballistic missiles are their deterrent. The proxies give them strategic depth. To the IRGC, negotiating away those 4 pillars isn't a diplomatic concession. It is an act of total surrender that will lead to their execution. They will never willingly negotiate them away.
So diplomacy is dead.
It failed. Years of attempts like trying to resurrect the JCPOA, the nuclear deal collapsed. Because diplomacy failed, military pressure became the only lever left. But as we've discussed, that military pressure results in a global hostage situation and a forever war of systems.
Because neither side can achieve a quick victory, the conflict just grinds the region down. And the reconstruction is going to be an agonizing, multi-decade process. The analysis maps out the timeline of recovery, and it is a sobering reality check.
It breaks the recovery down into 4 distinct phases. Phase 1 is the immediate aftermath, spanning month 0 to month 3. And this is pure triage.
Just trying to stop the bleeding.
Exactly. Deploying mobile reverse osmosis units for drinking water, building temporary pontoon bridges, emergency disease containment for cholera outbreaks.
Then we move to Phase 2, which covers 3 months to 12 months.
Phase 2 is partial restoration. This is where you might get the electrical grid back up to 40 or 60% capacity. You reopen the strategic corridors. The cities technically become livable again, but they are highly fragile.
Phase 3 is where the real rebuild happens, covering years 1 through 5.
Yes. Phase 3 is the major rebuild costing hundreds of billions of dollars. This is manufacturing massive industrial gas turbines, rebuilding LNG facilities, and expanding the shattered desalination networks.
And the final phase? Phase 4.
Phase 4 spans from 5 years to well over 20 years. This is full normalization, restoring human capital, training new engineers and doctors, and rebuilding institutional trust.
And the analysis points out that this entire 20-year reconstruction process is plagued by the enormous risk of corruption and political fragmentation. It draws a parallel to the reconstruction of Iraq after 2003, but on a vastly larger scale.
Because rebuilding the Gulf involves highly complex desalination and LNG tech, the sheer volume of money flowing in creates an absolute magnet for systemic corruption.
Which highlights the absolute necessity of an off-ramp.
Yes. Without a diplomatic exit strategy that allows Iran's regime a politically survivable way out, the pressure becomes a treadmill of endless destruction.
It's an incredible paradox. It's like doing radical surgery to remove a tumor, but the surgery destroys the patient's entire nervous system, and the physical rehab will take 20 years. Is the optimal military execution actually a strategic failure if it leaves the world paying the hospital bill?
That is the profound question. As the text wisely notes, wars like this rarely end when one side is destroyed. They end when one side finally sees a survivable way out.
So, To recap the terrifying reality of this 2026 scenario, we aren't just looking at a traditional geopolitical clash. It's a siege of systems where water is a countdown timer and where the world's most advanced militaries can destroy states but cannot replace them. We want to profoundly thank you, the listener, for taking this heavy, incredibly complex journey with us today.
Understanding these deep systemic vulnerabilities is absolutely crucial in navigating our fragile world.
And on that note, we want to leave you with a lingering thought. It's a question that isn't directly answered in the text. If this deep dive has shown us anything, it's that the greatest threat to a modern city isn't a nuclear warhead, it's the fragility of the machines that give it life. If a few targeted strikes on a desalination plant or a power grid can bring a civilization to its knees in a matter of days, you have to ask yourself, how secure are the invisible systems keeping your own city alive right now?